Welcome to our next talk, Teaching the Lost Tools of Writing with Ease. I'm excited that you're here and I'm looking forward to digging into this curriculum with you and discussing the different aspects of how to think about it and how to teach it. One of the things that I have found is that when we think about something in the right way or in a way that's more in alignment with its nature, everything becomes easier. And so the question this raises for me when I'm teaching anything, and specifically the lost tools of writing for our purposes today, is how do we think about the lost tools of writing? Is there a right way to think about it? I know there's a lot of strong opinions out there about the program, one way or another. You could be like me, super fangirl, unapologetic fangirl of the Lost Tools of Writing, and then some people really don't like it. And there's space for different opinions. There's space for different experiences with any curriculum. The question I'm wondering, as a teacher, as an educator, and as somebody who teaches teachers, whenever I get pushback, I want to be curious. I'm like, okay, so what's here? What's the nature of this thing? How do I make this decision? How do I know I can trust myself that I've landed on a solid and grounded view of a thing so that I can make good decisions and feel good about my decisions? Because really, at the end of the day, that's, I think, what most of us are worried about. We love our kids, we want the best for them, and we want to be confident that we're making the right decisions. All good and noble things. And we get to do that. And the way we get to that space is to trust ourselves, learn to trust ourselves so that we can trust our gut, and to explore the nature of a thing. And then when we ask those right questions and we explore how to think about a thing, so much freedom comes in to be like, oh, this is what I'm noticing. So, how do we think about the lost tools of writing? How do we think about rhetoric? We've discussed rhetoric quite a bit already, but now applied here. So in the big picture of rhetoric, we have the five canons. We have these lofty ideals of loving our neighbor and leading them to truth. Where does the lost tools of writing fit into that? The first thing I want us to talk about is, let's take a minute and think about sports. Who here has played sports? Especially if you've played like at the collegiate level or a very serious high school level. And just say yes or me in the chat box. Okay, awesome. What sports did you guys play? Tennis, baseball, soccer, field hockey, basketball. Hey, we're basketball people over here. Softball. Okay. Yeah, my son, he's my oldest child, cross country, soccer, softball, volleyball. Good. Excellent. So my 18-year-old son, he is an athlete. He's an elite basketball player, and he's also in football. And he's being recruited by D1 colleges for these sports. So he's like at the high level. And it's been really interesting to learn, because I ran track, but we're more artsy in the family I grew up in. And so this whole sports world was really new to me, and I had to learn the vibe of it and like just understand it, because my son would be like, Mom, I actually have to work out this much, right? This is not just me trying to. And I was like, just waking up to the reality of how intense the training is for somebody playing at that level was like, whoa. Oh my goodness. But it's been fascinating to watch his journey and his transformation, and him like take it on and put in the hard work and just relentlessly just going for it, and not going to prom and not doing these other things that he could have done, that most teenagers are like, I'm not giving that up. He was willing to give up because he has this goal that he really wants to reach. And so one of my favorite things is just to watch him practice and watch the coaches coach them at practice. The games are fun. I love the games, but there's something poetic about a good man coaching team of boys or young men. It's like watching the making of men. It's fascinating. You know, well, I'm a philosopher at heart. And so anytime I'm anywhere, I'm thinking that deeply about it. Like, this is just how I show up in the world. And, and one day I was just watching, and they had to put up about 200 shots before they were allowed to leave the gym for every practice. They like, you do all the different skills training things where you're working on your agility and your speed, and then you're practicing plays, and then you're putting up shots. But there's like all these different categories. Those my sports people, you guys let me know what it was like for you in your respective sports. Like, we know that we go to a basketball game, but how much do we know how involved the practice is? You're not playing the game until the game. And the way you prepare for the game is by lifting weights, running, swimming. Then they do practicing their plays, and then they do all this like agility training and handling the ball, and it's a lot of repetitive motions, and then they put up their shots, like 200 of them. And so all of that, nobody would say that's the game, right? Nobody would say that's the game, but everyone would say that is necessary in order to play the game. We understand innately that there's a distinction between skills training and the game itself. And when somebody is new to a thing, there is more skills training because the game is a higher milestone. They're just not ready. Yeah, they could play a game, but they're not going to be that great. And they probably won't know what they're doing. And they haven't come into their bodies yet. And we still let them play, but they're not really like, you can tell the difference between somebody who's really playing the game of basketball, that's really internalized it, and it's a part of their muscle memory, and then somebody who's brand new, who doesn't even know the plays yet, isn't really sure how to move his feet, it's kind of tripping over himself. And wherever they are is okay, they're at different milestones. It's easy to think about it that way when we think about sports, when we think about this scenario. It is the same situation when it comes to teaching any skill, academic skill. In fact, one distinction I want is important to make is when we're teaching, there's only three things that we can teach. We can either present knowledge. This is just the facts. This war happened at this date. This is purple. It's just straight up what it is. Not much discussion about it. You just need to know this. This is the definition. Then there's skills. We'll come back to that in a second. And then there's truths. Truths are concepts, like what is justice? I could tell you a definition of what justice is, but that's not landing until you have an apprehension in your mind and soul about it. You come to yourself as it relates to that particular idea. And then there's skills. Oh, and when we're teaching concepts, it looks a lot more like what Socrates is doing, that back and forth, the discussion, the co-exploring. I call it co-inquiring. That's what you're doing as the teacher in that moment. You're co-inquiring with the truth out here and you going towards it together. And then there's skills. Skills, the process of coaching, teaching a skill is coaching. So when somebody's talking about, oh, I'm a coach, what they're doing is externalizing an internal process. They're externalizing an internal process. So of all the things we can teach, a large portion of them are skills. And when we're teaching skills, the appropriate method for teaching them is to coach. Because the only way to show a student how to do something is to externalize that internal process in a way they can imitate it, let them try it, and then give them feedback. This is the process. And you start at the baby milestones and you work your way up as they have experienced success at each one of those milestones. And this is the pattern. And so the Lost Tools of Writing is a skills training program for rhetoric. It's level one. It's level one. And it is some of the things whenever I'm interviewing parents for our academy, our homeschool, online homeschool academy, that is one of the most common questions I get. Well, the Lost Tools of Writing essay, it's pretty basic, and it's not really an essay that you could submit to college. That's like, and so they're worried about that. And yes, the concern comes from a legitimate place. The thing that I'm noticing though is the misunderstanding about what we're doing first. And so we're coaching the skills. We're getting started with speed drills, putting up shots, getting the right muscle memory. Like, what am I doing in my mind when I'm asking these invention questions? Because I can give you the questions to ask, but I guarantee you, a student who has been with me for a year, it becomes part of how they think. But only because I've taken the time to isolate certain skills and let the other stuff kind of fall by the wayside so that I can specifically address that particular skill with more focus. That's what actually produces the result of being that kind of thinker. And so one of the reasons I love the Lost Tools of Writing so much is that it does that. It gives you space to focus in on a particular skill set and not worry about all the other stuff. Like, I'm not going to require of you to write a college level essay at the same time that you're learning the first few milestones of skills to even do that. But we get worried about things. And so no, when we say it that way, nobody's disagreeing with that. We're like, oh yeah, of course, we're not going to do that. But sometimes we just don't see it that way in the moment. And that's okay. so the first thing is, when we're thinking about the Lost Tools of Writing, whether you are teaching it to your own child, you're teaching it at a co-op, or you're a director of a co-op that is interviewing parents and explaining, it's this mitigates so much frustration about the Lost Tools of Writing almost immediately, because we're asking the question, what is it? What is its nature? It's skills training. It looks like basketball practice. And once people understand that's what it is, everything they were frustrated about, it's not a frustration anymore. They understand this is what it feels like to be in skills training, and there's nothing wrong with it because it's actually cultivating the stuff that we need to cultivate. I share that with my students, and it's just so much relief. It's so much relief because they'll get anxious. They're like, this feels demeaning to me to write this rudimentary persuasive essay. And I'm like, it's okay. Yeah. So when I tell them, no, it's just skills training, I'm not actually saying that that is an essay that we're going to like hang on the refrigerator. we hang the photo of us making the dunk at the game on the refrigerator and not necessarily practice. so it helps them have the right categories for thinking about their work, and then they feel better about it. And then the parents understand it too. And if being in the homeschool community, if you're teaching your own children, then we have our conversation with ourselves. If you're teaching at a co-op, to be able to just share that with the parents, I'll say this as a side note. If you're in a leadership position in the homeschool community, we have one of the hardest dynamics to address, because nowhere else in the educational spectrum do we experience this. We are teachers of homeschool kids whose parent is the actual teacher, like by law. And so they have there is a dynamic of collaboration that we have to honor and deal with and get good at in the homeschool world that no one else anywhere has to deal with. In a school, they just dictate, this is what we're doing, get in line. And you do, for the most part. if you're all the way just, homeschooling by yourself and you're not a part of a co-op, you can do what you want within the framework and parameters and forms that you've selected. In a homeschool community and a homeschool co-op, you have to synthesize those two things. Like, where's the tension of the uh of saying, okay, we're doing a thing together, coming around a certain point of unity. And also, I honor the fact that at the end of the day, you're responsible for your kid, because you're homeschooling. That's what it means, And so it's interesting. So if you're in leadership, knowing how to talk about the different things that you're teaching at your co-op is really important, because we have to enroll the parents in our vision. They need to buy into it. Otherwise, it's going to create problems later on in the year. Like, that's your responsibility as a leader, to communicate clearly. Yeah, you have to persuade them. Exactly. So study rhetoric. But especially the last talk, that's great talk for just leadership and these kind of enrolling conversations that we have with our families. Okay, so how early can the last tools be taught? Okay, save that question. I'm going to leave some question time at the end, and we'll come back to that. Okay, so the next thing, so we've talked about the fact that first we want to know how to think about it. We talked about rhetoric and how we think about this practice of rhetoric as learning to love our neighbor, loving our fellow man in community, making decisions in community, the practice of love of our fellow man. That's our come from. And that because we're coaching a skill, there's milestones that get to be honored, and we take our students through these milestones to help them get to mastery. So a couple things. A couple more points about skills. Another thing that and this is something we go deep into in the fellowship, which we actually are opening up enrollment for that in the next month. So if you're interested, you're more than welcome to join us. Just stay connected to the email list and we'll notify you when it opens up again. But coaching requires, whenever we're talking about becoming an excellent classical teacher, when we're focusing on cultivating our craft of coaching, so getting better at being a coach, one of the things we get to learn, and it's always specific to the thing that you're coaching, the thing that you're teaching, the skill you're teaching, is knowing that skill well enough so that I am in touch with the internal process. So have you ever experienced someone, and I'm sure we all have things in our life that this has happened, where a person's really good at doing something just themselves, but then when they try to teach it, it's not landing. Like, all they can do is do it really well in front of the student, but they're not externalizing. It is a form of externalizing, but they can't say anything about it or address any of the nuances of what the student is doing. They're not seeing the student. They see their craft, but they're not seeing the student and the student's interaction with that. So like for a basketball example, that would look like a basketball player being able to dunk, but then when he's trying to show the kid how to dunk and teach the kid how to dunk, he's not noticing what's in the gap for the student so that he can dunk. But he just keeps doing it over and over again. And he puts the responsibility 100% on the student to notice everything and to figure it out himself. That's not coaching. Coaching is, in order to dunk, you need to, and I'm making this up, I have no idea how to dunk. You have to run, you have to start with your feet like this, and you have to jump off in this way, and it feels like this in your body. So if you notice this, you're not doing this. And so try to tweak it this way. Like, they can talk about what's happening inside. They can talk about how it feels to do that. And when they're watching the kid, they see it. They see how he didn't move his body the right way, and they know what to tell him to tweak it so that he can, and then achieve success. So that's what a coach does. They have an understanding of the milestones. So one of what that means for us is if we're going to coach, we get to cultivate it in ourselves as well. And, we're not masters at everything. So there's things I don't coach because I don't know how to do it. And that's when I pay somebody else to do it. And this is the value of a more expensive class, by the way. If they're coaching skills, that is worth a lot of money versus like just like a co-op that we're just discussing. No skills are actually being coached. We're just coming together, and there's nothing wrong with that. Maybe that's exactly what we want our community to be, or the experience we want our student to have. But if you're paying a lot of money for a class, be sure they're actually coaching, because that's really what you're paying for, is a master. And by a master, I mean somebody who has mastered that skill and can externalize it for your student, which is because I think sometimes there's a pushback between, oh, we have to have experts. Well, we don't have to have experts for a lot of things. Like, we can do co-inquiring together. We can use books and different things to learn knowledge. But for a skill, you do have to have someone who knows how to do it. There's no other way to externalize that than to have that. And that's not bad. That just means, it actually takes a village, and that's okay. Like, nobody is meant to do all the things. So seeing those distinctions is really important as well. Okay, the other part that comes into the Lost Tools of Writing in terms of how we think about it. So we have skills training, we have this distinction of coaching, these three things we can teach. And then you have the fact, the content areas or the skills areas of, rhetoric, the mindset of rhetoric that we discussed last hour, reading and writing. So I mentioned in the last hour that reading and writing are reciprocal arts. You can only write as deeply as you read. And so if you've done a very quick read of a book, then you're probably only looking at a narration level depth for anything that you write. So if you're reading a book in a week, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing immoral about that. But what's our question? What is the nature of a thing? What is the nature of this read? If I'm going to read a book quickly, the expectation should be appropriate for the quickness and the depth of the read. There's nothing wrong with doing a quick read of a book, but then let's not pretend that I can write a deep essay about it. I can write a narration and have a basic plot line, and that's fine. And then my student can know that we're not going deep. We're just doing a quick read of this to get the story in our minds, but know that this deserves much more depth. But this is what we're doing right now. And this is what we're doing right now. That way they walk away from the experience knowing, well, I haven't finished reading the book. Like, there's more to discover. And we can make choices all the time and decide the depth at which we do things, and then respond appropriately based on the investment we've given. And so the principle there is the investment should parallel the benefit, or I think the benefit. The investment should, so like I don't get to go deep and express my opinion about things if I haven't invested time and energy into really getting to know what the author is saying. It's a respect thing. Like, if I haven't done that, I haven't earned the right to give my opinion. And there's nothing wrong with that. But then the deeper we read, the more we can expect. So that's another principle. And so how that applies in the Lost Tools of Writing is when now there's different scenarios that you're going to experience as those who are teaching the Lost Tools of Writing. Sometimes you'll have, if it's you around the kitchen table, then you have more control, you know more of what's going on, so you can craft it in a more specific way. If it's at a co-op, you may not be the literature teacher also, or the history teacher. So the books that would be read you may not also be teaching those, depending on how your community or school breaks that up. And so if you are not the teacher of the history or the literature, and you're only the teacher of the lost tools of writing, it can present some difficulties because you're not in control of how they read. I created a handout for my students when I was teaching just the lost tools of writing called How to Read So You Can Write. And it's just some short tips. It's not super invasive because, I mean, when I'm teaching history and literature, I take an entire 4 years to teach them how to read slowly and well, and according to the nature of these different kinds of yes, I will, that will be one of the handouts I share with you. I'm going to focus more on the lost tools side of it, but you'll get that handout. Denise, can I ask you a favor? When I say I'm going to give you guys something, would you jot it down so that I actually remember what I say I'm going to give out? Thank you. Okay. Is yes. So then you have this experience where how you don't know how their teacher, whether it be their mom, their mother, or another teacher, is teaching how to read. And so a couple things that you can do in that situation is, you can use this handout. And if you know about the book, you can that they're reading in their other class, then maybe you can integrate that somehow on the fly. But it's important to have the boundary that if you're not, if this is if you're in a situation where you're being paid, especially to teach, or you're given the responsibility to teach the lost tools of writing, that you are not trying to be their literature teacher also, because they're two different arts. They're two different modes of inquiry. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. And so it's a whole different skill set to teach someone how to read. Although there's a lot of integration here, there's different approaches. So just be mindful of that. If you're like, I don't even want to deal with that, this question of what I should read with the lost tools of writing and not read is not something that, like, you just want to teach the writing. And then I would recommend choosing myths and fairy tales to write from, especially in the beginning, because they're short. You can experience the whole and read it really together in class. And because of the skills training nature and the shorter nature of those beginning essays, it works really well. Okay. And we'll talk about more specific tips towards the end. We're almost done. Oh, wow. We have been talking. Okay. So I want to give you a couple examples of what it looks like to teach mindset through the lost tools of writing. So when I was saying this is mostly mindset, what does that look like? How is it different than what's already in the curriculum? So this is where it makes a difference if you know how to do this. If you've experienced writing this or not. If you haven't, you're still waking up to the nuances inside yourself. So first thing is, as a practice for teachers, I think practicing mindfulness and anything that increases your own mindfulness and attention and attentiveness is a core practice to become a great classical teacher. Because my ability to coach and teach is predicated on my ability to see. And if I'm all jumbled in my head, if I'm anxious, if I'm stressed, I will not notice what I need to notice to coach my students. So I get to learn how to calm down and slow down and be aware of more things around me. So I'm gonna and I'll give. Okay, here we go. All right, so I'm gonna just pull from, and I'll actually share my screen on this one. Share screen. This is not edited for grammar yet. So, okay, so I create this for my level 1 students, and I call it mindset checks. And, when I introduce the lost tools of writing to them, I give them the whole spiel about basketball and sports and and skills training. And so then throughout, as I work through it, what I'm looking for, so what it feels like inside of me is that I am, Andrew Kern calls it unlocking the inner logic of it, unlocking the inner logic. It's where I'm thinking about my thinking and my process. So what it looks like is me slowing down and reflecting on what it felt like for me to go through that process. What questions I naturally asked myself, what things I did, what I did first, second, and third, what things occurred to me. Now, if you are a super intuitive person, this process is going to be a little more difficult for you. You still can do it though, because I'm naturally intuitive, and I'll tell this short story. So I've, for whatever reason, most of my students were also super intuitive as well until first year of Padea. And this student was like all sensing, like all sensing. And I'm like explaining something, and he says, and I say, you know what I mean? And he says, no, I don't know what you mean. And I'm like, oh, I get to take myself on. So that student was such a good student for me to have, because it forced me, in order for him to learn, it forced me to name what was going on inside of me. Deanna, did you have your hand up? No, okay, just kidding. I saw a hand. Okay, so it feels like being aware, and I literally, this is what I do in my mind. I if I'm about to write the do invention for one of my essays, I think about, what did I ask first? What occurred to me? How did I feel? What was my mindset? What was I open to? And then also times that it wasn't working, what was I doing differently then? So I'm in this constant contemplative state as a teacher, reflecting on my own experience and past experiences, comparing wins, and also times that it didn't work, and looking at, because anytime it doesn't work, that's a ton of awesome information, because you can ask, what's in the gap? Why didn't the result get created? And what needed to be different? So it's this reflection on your process. And so as I name those things and those come out, that's what becomes my mindset coaching. And so this is what fills the gap for the students, so they really get in the mindset. The 5 topics of invention are the easiest and the hardest part of the Lost Tools of Writing, in my opinion. They're the easiest part in the sense that you could just give someone a worksheet, one of the worksheets, and be like, ask these questions and answer them. Ask these questions and answer them for your essay. However, the whole point of the topics of invention is that it's meant to cultivate the classical spirit of inquiry. So what does that look like? So here's an example. So mindset practices for invention using the topics of invention. So these are the tips I gave for this particular lesson. First of all, general curiosity about your issue. Be sure to choose an issue you are genuinely interested in and exploring. And so I know that general curiosity is a key important point for a student to tap into, a demeanor, a mindset for a student to be in order to produce the best results that he can or she can in invention. We all know how to be curious, but if we're in a space where we're like, I don't feel like doing this, this is annoying, oh, I just have to do this, and then we shift into actual curiosity, that's powerful. And they don't have to have been doing the Lost Tools of Writing or any other curriculum for multiple years before they have that. They know how to be curious. So how can I invite them into curiosity and help them with that? So the mindset tip 1. And so I'll, if somebody is having a really hard time with that, I'll spend time like talking to them about curiosity, asking them, what is something you're really curious about? Tell me about that. And I'll even say, so tell me about that. And you watch their eyes light up while they start talking about it. And then I'm like, see that? Do you notice how you feel? Tell me about the experience of that inside of yourself right now. That's how you want to feel when you're doing your issue, when you're doing your invention. And all of a sudden now they have a frame of reference and they can do that and apply it to the writing situation. So yeah, another one, exploring your issue like exploring a mountain. Rather than answering questions on a worksheet, there's always another angle or perspective you can use to approach your discovery. And so one temptation, because it's a workbook, the impulse would be to just go through the check boxes and answer the questions. But we don't want to do that, because that's not remember, what are we doing with the liberal arts? We are cultivating faculties. We're cultivating powers of truth perception. That does not happen by just going through a checkbox. We are stepping into a way of being, a mode of inquiry. And then third, stay open to whatever comes to mind and capture it. You never know what will end up being significant. If a discovery is not a reason for or against your issue, the discovery often leads to other gold level discoveries. Honor all your discoveries by capturing them in your Annie chart. So there's a couple principles here that I talk about when I'm introducing that to my student, is don't judge yourself. If you thought it, honor it. You're a creative being, and you get to honor the things. Like, we're digging for gold, which means we're gonna get a lot of dirt, and we're gonna get gold, and we're gonna get the trash that might be in the ground too. Like, you get all the things, and we get to honor it and capture it without judgment. So this detached curiosity of like, oh, that's interesting. And some students, that's really hard. Like, there are some students, we work on that all year long, that not judging themselves or trying to have they want to please me, right? They want to please their teachers, and so well, what does she want to hear? Like, it takes a while for some of the students to really trust that when I say, I'm not judging you in the sense that the way that people say that, not in the, I'm judging them in the sense that I'm assessing their work, but like, there's no judgment about what you just came up with. And I'm not going to like say, oh, that's not good enough, because invention is meant to be open and curious and free flowing and letting it flow. If you're judging yourself, so the other part of that, if you're judging yourself, that's antithetical to the mindset of invention. Invention is open. Judgment is analysis. That's the role. That's where arrangement. We're going to judge. Don't worry. We're going to sort out what's good, worth being in our paper and not. So it takes a while though. And so I'm constantly watching my students, and I'm like, okay, how are they acting around this? This one, topics of invention, I will set up meetings with my students individually sometimes, because they just need to do it out loud with me. And depending on how big your class is, if it's around the kitchen table, perfect. Like, that's the ideal scenario. You need to hear them do this. You want to be privy to the way they're thinking about this. And so if you can get in a situation where you're hearing them process through this and then allow them to hear you, another habit I have developed is I think out loud. And it's helpful for coaching because they hear my process, so then they can imitate it. Now, sometimes it's annoying because I don't always turn it off in other situations. They're like, girl, we did not need to hear all that. I'm like, my bad. So, and then the practice of invention is a way of loving our neighbor. If we are leading others to truth, we have a responsibility to discover the truth for ourselves, interrogate our own assumptions, and explore both sides of an issue. So that's where, we bring in, with each lesson, we're tying it back to, how does this help us love our neighbor? How does this help us love our neighbor? So that's an example. So with each lesson, and I'm happy to share, I have these for the lessons, the mindset check part of it. I'm not going to include the examples because they're straight from the Lost, some of them are straight from the Lost Tools of Writing book, and I want to honor any copyright stuff, but I'm going to isolate the mindset checks parts for you and share those with you. But if you have this, and then you have the Lost Tools of Writing book, then you can use both of them together to and this will help kind of bridge the gap for you a little bit while you're still exploring this craft yourself. And so you get to kind of peer into some of the internal mindset work that is behind these tasks. Okay, let's see. Stop share. All right. So a few things just logistically when you're setting up your Lost Schools of Writing year. The first thing is to really read the introduction and the back of the book. It is fantastic. Well written, so helpful. I mean, pore over it. Don't just glance through it. Like, really read it. Really read the introduction and everything in the back. So good. So good. It helps further explain mindset about like how to think about the Lost Tools of Writing, has lots of extra help around assessment and that sort of thing. So that's the first thing. When you're setting up your Lost Tools for the year, first thing, really read the introduction and the ending part. The second thing is, I mean, you're already doing it here. We're working on the mindset. Whenever we teach anything, one of the questions we should be asking is, what is the nature of this thing? And what does that mean for how it should be taught? And you're here in this workshop doing just that right now. So you're already on the way. The other thing is then it starts to get into logistical. What does the flow look like? So some of those questions are going to be answered in the workbook itself, and the teachers in the beginning matter and ending matter, they have suggestions for how to break up the week. So that's pretty straightforward. But the important thing there is to be intentional about it. I don't know what everyone's proclivity is, but I find that there's two kinds of teachers. There's teachers that I like to call the philosopher. I'm one of those. And those that I call the facilitator. And we each have a natural orientation towards one or the other. The philosopher is like a little bit like a hippie, or like free flowing. I'm just excited about all the ideas. There's a lot of enthusiasm there. I'm like, and we're super curious. We're really good. Probably the questions come more naturally to us, and that sort of thing. Our struggle is intentionality with schedules and logistics. Like, we'll forget that, I actually need to be on top of grading, and those things can be a struggle for us. I need to make sure to respond to things in a timely manner. I need to have decided ahead of time what the flow for the week is going to be, and then communicate it in words that other humans can understand, preferably in writing, so parents know what I'm up to with their kids and then can plan accordingly. These are the things we forget about sometimes. The facilitator is more on the side of like the structures, and they got that down. They're like on the communication. You can definitely count on them to do all those logistical things very well. They may struggle more with the questions and curiosity side too. Like, so we each have a proclivity. And it's important to know that about yourself going in. And if you're more on the philosopher side, you're going to have to be more disciplined. There's just no other way to say it. You're just gonna have to be more disciplined about like making sure you've really thought through. And even though we're like, I'm pretty good with going with the flow, one of the hardest leadership lessons I've learned is that I can be okay with that, but it's not okay for me to impose that on other people, because it's actually stressful for my parents and the people I serve to not have things clear and communicating on time and being consistent. So just know yourself. And if you're on the facilitator side, the logistics, you're like, this is my favorite time of the year. Give me more of this. Let's make a spreadsheet. Let's make a chart. Let's map it out. So the other part is being intentional about planning your week and your year. So making those decisions and then communicating it clearly. The next thing is setting up the year for your students. So one thing that I think a lot of people forget about, and it's not mentioned in the lesson, which is why and if it is, it for whatever reason, people just gloss over it. All my students have always glossed over it. So be intentional about directing their attention to the sample essays and the self-editing checklist at the back of the book. Every time they write an essay, they are editing it against that self-editing checklist. Period. Like that's your assessment rubric almost. You can go down that checklist and say, did they do all these things in their essay? And if they didn't, you know exactly what you need to say, go do this. And if they don't know how to do it, then you get to show them and coach them through that. The other great coaching tool that you have at your disposal are the sample essays at the back of the book. Because one of the things you're coaching in the elocution part is flowing from one part of the outline to the next. And that's not necessarily intuitive. So you have 2 examples for every essay that you can read together, because some people like to hear the whole essay before they start breaking apart the parts, and you have them. Great examples. If you're teaching rhetoric, you need to be a collector of good essays. As you come across them, just keep a folder and collect good essays. You can use the ones in the book, but then as you come across other ones, just put them in a folder, categorize. Oh, this would be a really good one to teach refutation. That's a masterful refutation. Like just collect good examples. So the third thing that we do, and this works only in person, but it's so worth it, is I make each student get a 1/2-inch 3-ring binder and put like 9 dividers in it, one for each essay. And under each tab, they put all their work for that essay. So one of the things when you're coaching, like for example, when you're coaching them turning their outline into an essay, one of the things you're watching for is, do they actually take what's in their outline and make that their essay? Or again, you would be surprised. And you do one thing every week. So last week I assigned arrangement, and then this week I'm assigning elocution. And so I'm not going to remember everything that they said in their outline, but I need to be able to reference that to see, because I have students that will just write an outline and then their essay is completely different. I'm like, what? You didn't even do your invention about this. How did this happen? And so it's really helpful, because when I'm doing elocution, I want to reference their outline. Or when I'm looking at the outline, I want to reference their invention. I'm like, because you're coaching the invention flowing to the arrangement flowing into the elocution. And so being able to have those relationships at your fingertips is helpful. So then everything goes in this binder, and they turn in the binder when they turn in their work. And so then you have this record of it, and then it can turn into a writing portfolio fairly easy for the parents. And it's nice. And, even when you can, even if you're doing online, you can have your parents use this in their home. You just, they can't turn it in, obviously. Okay. The other thing, okay. A couple other tips, and then we'll have a few minutes of questions. So other than for setting up the year, the other thing that I think is really important, and I learned this probably the second year I was teaching the Lost Tools, is the students really do like to know the why. I remember the first year that I brought in Scott Kreider and read some of the things about rhetoric. I did it at the end of the year as kind of like a celebration. And the students were all like, I really wish I would have known that at the beginning of the year. It would have made such a difference for me. Like I would have known what I was doing. Essentially what they were saying is like, I like that approach to rhetoric, and I would have enjoyed the experience more had I had that in my mind the entire year. And first of all, they were able to articulate that to me, and I'm like, okay, that's powerful. We'll be mindful of that. So I started opening my year. How you open your year is critical, because that is your invitation. That's your invitation to them in this thing that you're going to teach, and you're setting up for them how they're going to think about this thing. And once you establish that first, first impression, it's really hard to change that. And so if there's any lesson to obsess over more than others, it's the way you're going to invite them in. The example given in the Lost Tools of Writing is excellent, where you're asking, tell me all your problems, tell me all your writing problems. Like, let's just complain and roast writing for a second. What do we not like about writing? What makes it frustrating? And we just put it all up. That's a great way to start it out. And I find I'll either do it after we do that, and I follow what they say in the book because it's really good. It works. It works. And then I either close that lesson or do a second, kind of orientation, the next class, where I talk about how to think about rhetoric. When I talk about what are we doing? What are we trying to cultivate? I introduce them to the liberal arts a little bit, especially if they're in high school. Like, they want to know. They want to know, and they really appreciate knowing. I have found that it serves really well. Again, that's the office of assertion. Another practice that I have that has been tremendously helpful to me is, so I feel supported as a teacher, and as a thinker and a student, is to have a couple resources that are guides to me. Office of Assertion has been that for me primarily. Also a lot of Wendell Berry's essays in his collection, Standing by Words. Another book that has been a guide to me is Classical Rhetoric for the Modern Student. So sometimes, I don't necessarily present this information to my students, but what it does is it gives me a more robust understanding of the lesson that I'm teaching, so that I am further along than them. So that's kind of how I was coaching myself while I was trying to level up and go deeper and get better at this craft. Is whatever lesson I was teaching in the Lost Tools of Writing, I would find that topic in here, and I would read everything about that topic in here. And that, combined with the Office of Assertion, really helped me level up more quickly. And so it was very supportive in that way. Also, the CiRCE Institute has some resources that are helpful. They have an online group. It used to be Yahoo group. I think it's still Yahoo. And is anyone in it? I know they changed the name. But anyway, you can go on there and ask questions. And the apprentices that are currently, it's Facebook now. Okay. I still get emails about it, but the apprentices that are currently in the apprenticeship have a requirement to come in there and answer questions. So it's a fantastic place to go learn and ask your questions. And everyone there are like serious about their craft. So they take seriously cultivating their craft of teaching. And so you're going to get really honest and helpful feedback. So that's a community where you can learn more. And then of course, CiRCE has videos and stuff, videos that go along with the lesson that you could watch to just see how somebody else is doing it. And so when you do that, though, notice what you're watching. You're watching somebody's teaching. So it's almost like, I think Leah Lutz does a lot of them. And so something else you can do is, if you're cultivating your craft of teaching, get in the habit of watching other teachers and watch how they teach. Watch their patterns. I'll do that. I'll sign up for somebody's class just to watch them teach. Because how else am I supposed to learn? I want to know how to become a better teacher, and I learn by imitation. And so I just obsessively watch people teach and take that in. So watch people teach. What's their pattern? What do they do first, second, and third? In the fellowship, one of the things that we do is we meet together as a group twice a month, and we have some time where we share our wins and like our struggles. And when we're sharing our wins, one of the things we do is we kind of put a magnifying glass on, how did you create that result? So then somebody just saying, hey, I was really proud of this literature lesson I taught, and this is why. Then we all come around this discussion and be like, okay, how did you create that? What did you do to create that? And so then it becomes like a little coaching session for all of us as we discover more of the inner logic of what is creating great results in our teaching situations. Um, okay. And then the last thing is be mindful of the process, the order in which you plan your lesson versus the order in which you teach. And I'm pretty sure it addresses that in the Lost Tools teacher handbook. Um, but when you're preparing your lesson, it's not the same order. When you're preparing your lesson, you first are getting a handle on the idea, making sure you can express that. And then you come up with your questions and that you're going to ask them how you want them to apply it. And only after you've done all that do you come up with your invitation. And you're and this is the last thing, and then we'll take a break and I'll have a few minutes for questions, but we'll have more time for questions at the very end. Is in the Lost Tools of Writing, they call it preparation or pre-preparation stage, that part of the mimetic sequence. It's a form of invitation. It's your exordium to your students. And so the way to think about that when you're like trying to land on what you're going to do, there's examples in the book and you can just do what the book says, but the heart behind it, like the thinking behind it, is what else in life requires my student to use this same faculty or way of thinking or way of being that I can bring to their attention, so it's an easier transition to this thing this new thing that I'm going to teach them. In other words, show them what they already know about the subject. So show them what they already know about the skill set. So like, for example, when I was coaching a student in curiosity, because I knew she needed curiosity to do invention well, I asked her what she loves. I asked, her to talk about that. And then I'm like, see, you already know how to do it. Go there. And then she gets it. Like, that's all it took, is making that helping them make that connection. Like, you already know how to do this. You're brilliant. Oh my goodness. You already have everything that you need inside of you. Let me just help awaken it and direct you to it. And so that's kind of what is the heart behind invention, the invitation for your teaching. Okay, so that is the end of my presentation about the Lost Tools of Writing. Is there any brief questions now? And we'll have more time for questions. Again, you can submit them in the Google form. It will do our best to address everything. Obviously, I mean, I could talk about the Lost Tools of Writing for like 6 hours, probably more. Okay, how early? So I have taught the Lost Tools of Writing as early as 6th grade. What I have found is that invention doesn't really land for them very powerfully until about 9th grade. When they make that switch, that transition into abstract thinking, they're, those middle school years. I don't know if any of you've heard Andrew Pudewa talk about what happens to students in middle school. He's like, they just lose all imagination. they're just like, what's happening? I mean, it's a thing. It's a thing. Like, this is how they really are. And we love them. And it is really difficult to coach invention when somebody's still in that stage of developmentally. Really hard. I don't think it's worth it, because now their first experience with the Lost Tools of Writing and rhetoric is not the one I want them to have. Now they've spent, if they're starting earlier, which you can do, and it's not the worst thing, but know that if you're doing that, then there's going to be there may be some relearning that gets to happen later when they do get into that more mature mindset. It makes a difference for how invention lands for them. So so you can 6th, 7th. I taught my son 6th, 7th, and 8th, and I mean, he's not broken or anything. So he's fine. He's an excellent writer. I had to deal with more annoyances though, because I made that decision. At the end of the day, it's not the end of the world if you do it, but just know that's part of it. So, okay. How much time do you spend reading before starting to write, and how much time do you spend on each essay? That's a great question. Okay, so part of my philosophy, and this differs a little bit than what the publisher says about it. Through several years of teaching it, I have found that I'm more comfortable doing it this way, and there are other people who do it different ways, and so we each get to make our choice. So I'll tell you what I do and why. So because I value withholding judgment until you understand, I don't really let my students write about a book until they're at least halfway through, if not at the end, because they haven't earned the right to pronounce judgment, because they haven't invested the time to understand. And I take that very seriously. So me cultivating that skill in my students is of utmost importance at Paideia. And that's one of our highest priorities. And for that reason, we make that decision. So in the beginning, we read fairy tales and myths to start out each year, because you can read them really quickly. So you can have a whole picture of the whole story fairly quickly. You can also do short stories. And then you have something to write off of right away. And so in terms of each essay, the book lays that out 3 weeks. The only exception, I break up the week where you teach sorting, and I do sorting for its own lesson, and then the other part of arrangement that week. So I think that's essay number 2 or 3. That week I spend 4 weeks on it. Okay. Can you talk more about discerning and figuring out milestones as a teacher and coach? Yes, I can. And will you add that question to the form? That's a good question for later. But that's a fantastic question. So maybe teach some rudimentary skills. Oh, you mean in 6th grade? Was that a follow-up? So what you can do, like, this is what at Paideia, the decision we have made, and Jessica's going to be talking about this in a minute, is we focus on narration until 9th grade. And so she's going to go through how we approach writing up until they're ready for Lost Tools, up until they're ready for that transition. So definitely listen to what she's going to say. That will probably answer a lot of your questions. Courtney, do you prefer to use literature or historical events for your essay topics? Yeah. So, okay. So this is how I approach it, because I learned rhetoric and how to teach rhetoric before I learned how to read literature appropriately. And so that was my path towards it. So I learned rhetoric first, then I learned how to read literature appropriately. And so a couple things here. When you're talking about what to use, you can use both, and with a caveat. And we're actually going to talk more about this at our next workshop. It's all about reading and modes of inquiry. So one of the things that is important to keep in mind is, what is the mode of inquiry that you're trying to teach with these different kinds of books? The point is not to have read certain books. The point is to have learned how to step into different modes of inquiry. There's a literary mode of inquiry. There's a rhetorical mode of inquiry. There's a historical mode of inquiry. There's a philosophical mode of inquiry, and they are different. And they each have their nature and deserve to be treated according to their nature. I am very careful we are very careful at Paideia about how we approach literature with the persuasive essay, because it would be really easy to just impose everything I think about the book on the essay. And so this is another reason why being really slow and mindful with the topics of invention is so important. Because if you're going to use literature, we want to be making sure that we're also honoring the nature of literature as we write about it. And there is a way to do it. I know there's some that don't think that there is. We have not had that experience, though. Our experience at Paideia has been that we have been able to write it about literature honor the nature of literature and honor the nature of rhetoric. And so it takes a little bit of extra work on you, the part of you as the teacher, to just make those distinctions in your mind. But once you have those distinctions, it's actually really easy. And so it's really just about what topic you choose. So the benefit of literature is they have a whole story and world contained. And so it's much easier to write about that when they can hold a story in their hands. And so one of the things that we require of our students, though, is that they're asking a question that the author is actually asking, and we can help them with that. So we give more direction in choosing an issue, because there's certain issues that's like, technically you could write it and it would serve the purpose of skills training, but it really does harm to how they're thinking about the literature and kind of works against how we're trying to teach them how to read. So we give them direction with the issues, which we can talk a little bit more about that at the end too. That's a whole nother workshop, to be honest. And we'll actually address a lot of that when we talk about the modes of inquiry in the next 101 workshop. With history, the problem is, in order to get to the place where you already see the patterns, you're going to have to do so much more research, which, if you have the time and space for that and you organize it that way, that's fine. But you will also then have the responsibility as the teacher to help direct your student in doing all that additional research so that they can ask and answer all the questions so they can write about it. Remember, depth parallels how much we've read and written about it. So keep those in mind. So you can use both. And those are the positives and negatives for using both. So essentially, when I'm using literature, like for example, with the Iliad, when I'm thinking about it, is this something that everyone is wondering, like whether Achilles should have withdrawn from battle? That is definitely a question that is being raised naturally and natively for the book. And to ask it is doing no harm, because by asking that, if I'm going to use the topics of invention properly with sincerity, it's going to lead me to discover the things about Greek culture that I need to know. And this is also where you as the teacher come in and being able to direct that inquiry. And the only time that doesn't work is when you leave a student to their own defenses and they have an insincere attitude about it and it's nonchalant. That's the only time that I have seen this produce results that I didn't like. And it was the attitude, the mindset, which is why I started coaching mindset so intentionally, because that makes the difference between using this according to the nature and honoring everything according to its nature and not. And so let me know, did that answer your question, Courtney? Yes, history and current events is great. Yeah, I think current events is a great one to use too. The one caveat there is just being careful of the emotional nature of it. They have to, if you're going to use current events, you again, like history, there's going to be some additional research that's required, and it's harder as a human to stay detached from the things you're emotional about. And so a work of literature is further away and there's less emotional investment, so it's easier. So if you choose current events, be sure to be really honest with yourself about what your students are ready for, and if they have the maturity to detach emotionally and withhold judgment until they understand. I mean, ideally, that's where we're going, right? That I can have a conversation about, I'm thinking of political realm, somebody who has like total disagreement, and I can check my emotions and truly hear them. Like that's where we want to go, but we have to be ready for it. It takes maturity and it takes already having those habits too. So, but yes, absolutely. IW, okay. Jenny, how do I best prepare my middle schoolers for LTW? Narration and reading. In fact, Miss Jensen is going to talk all about that. Yeah, she already said it. Where has this been all? Well, the last 3 years of knowing that. Oh my gosh, you guys are great. Okay, so again, if you have any other questions, the let me find the link. I'll paste it down here again. Please add them to the Google Doc, not Google Doc, the form, and we'll get to as many as we can. All right. All right, so let's take a 5-minute break and 5-10 minutes, and then we'll come back with Miss Jensen on the mic.